The year was 1967, and Elvis Presley was in trouble. His stardom, once as bright as the sun, had dimmed to a flicker. He hadn't had a hit song in years, and his movies, though profitable, were forgettable. Elvis was feeling trapped, like a caged animal, and he was starting to wonder if he'd ever be able to break free. Colonel Tom Parker, Elvis's manager, had a plan. In October, he started talking to NBC about a television special. By January 1968, Parker had a clear vision, a Christmas show where Elvis would sing holiday songs. It sounded safe, predictable, and utterly wrong to Elvis. He saw it as a desperate attempt to cling to the past, a past that was fading fast. Elvis was done with Christmas songs and safe bets. He wanted to reinvent himself, to reconnect with the audience that had made him a legend. Enter Bob Finkel, the producer assigned to the show. Unlike Parker, Finkel understood what the kids were into. He had a knack for the new and the daring, and NBC was all ears. They had just launched a groundbreaking show called Rowan and Martin's Laugh-In, and were hungry for more original content. Finkel saw the potential in Elvis, a chance to bring the king back to his roots and introduce him to a new generation. He pushed hard for a different kind of show, one that would be fresh, unorthodox, and exciting. Elvis was intrigued. He had a gut feeling that Finkel was right. But to make this vision a reality, they needed the right director. Enter Steve Binder, a young man who had already made waves with his innovative concert film, The T.Ami Show. Binder wasn't an Elvis fan, but he knew how to blend the magic of television with the energy of 1960s music. When he met Elvis, they clicked instantly. Binder saw the raw talent and the charisma that had made Elvis a star, and he was determined to bring that back to the forefront. Binder's plan was bold. He wanted Elvis to perform in a series of skits that would take the audience through his career, using Guitar Man as a unifying thread. But the real genius was in the sit-down jam session. It would be intimate, with Elvis and his friends on a small stage, surrounded by a live audience of adoring fans. The setting was designed to be casual, to let Elvis be himself, to show the world the man behind the legend. The icing on the cake came a week before the show. Binder convinced Elvis to replace the planned Christmas song with a new, powerful message song called If I Can Dream. The lyrics spoke to the social issues of the day, reflecting Elvis's own feelings about the recent assassinations of Martin Luther King Jr. and Robert F. Kennedy. It was a risk, but Elvis was all in. He poured his heart into the song, delivering a performance that would become one of the most memorable moments in television history. Elvis threw himself into the preparation. He moved into his dressing room at the NBC studios in Burbank, working day and night. He was leaner and more focused than he had been in years. The rehearsals were intense, and when the cameras rolled, Elvis was electrifying. Dressed in a black leather jumpsuit, he commanded the stage, his presence as magnetic as ever. He joked, he improvised, and he sang with a passion that hadn't been seen in a long time. The audience was electrified, and the energy was contagious. When the show aired on December 3, 1968, it was a sensation. Over 42% of the viewing public tuned in, making it the most watched television program of the season. Critics raved, and young fans were introduced to the Elvis they had only heard about. The single If I Can Dream climbed the charts, and the soundtrack album sold 500,000 copies in its first run. For Elvis, it was more than a comeback, it was a rebirth. Colonel Parker, seeing the success, was quick to capitalize. Offers for more television appearances flooded in, but Parker had a bigger plan. He set his sights on Las Vegas, the city where Elvis had once faltered, but was now poised to triumph. Parker negotiated a deal with the International Hotel, securing a residency that would pay Elvis $400,000 for 4 weeks of performances. It was a bold move, but Parker was confident. Elvis was back, and the world was about to see the king of rock and roll in a whole new light. Elvis Presley's American sessions marked a significant turning point in his career. These sessions, held at American Sound Studio in Memphis, brought together some of the best musicians and producers in the business, including the talented Chips Moman. Moman and his session musicians had a deep understanding of recording technology, which allowed them to create a sound that was richer and more complex than anything Elvis had done before. According to music critic Dave Marsh, the strings, horns, and backing vocals were seamlessly integrated into the arrangements, rather than just layered on top. This meant the songs had a polished yet soulful feel, blending pop, rock, and blues in a way that was both modern and rooted in tradition. Elvis's vocals were the heart of these recordings. They weren't too refined or sterile, but instead carried a sense of raw emotion and energy. His voice showcased a depth and maturity that had been building throughout his career. The result was a collection of songs that were not just hits, but also musically sophisticated and thematically mature. One of the standout tracks from these sessions was Suspicious Minds, which many consider Elvis's most powerful and accomplished single. Even the original, undubbed version of the song, recorded on the last night of the January session, revealed the breathtaking quality of Elvis's performance. The first single from the American sessions, In the Ghetto, was released in April 1969 and became a huge hit. It reached No. 3 on the pop charts and sold over 1.2 million copies, the most since Can't Help Falling in Love in 1961. This success was followed by Suspicious Minds in August, which topped the charts and became Elvis's first No. 1 single in 7 years. The momentum continued with Don't Cry Daddy, which reached No. 6 on the charts and sold another 1.2 million copies. These hits reignited interest in Elvis, and his albums started to gain more attention. The soundtrack to his NBC special, Elvis, rose to No. 8 on the album charts, and From Elvis in Memphis, the first album of material from the American sessions, received glowing reviews from critics, including a rave in Rolling Stone magazine. Critics like Peter Guralnick, Grail Marcus, and Dave Marsh helped to re-establish Elvis's reputation as a relevant and influential artist. They drew connections between his new music and his groundbreaking work from the 1950s, reinforcing his status as the king of rock and roll. However, Elvis wasn't just trying to please critics. He was exploring new musical territories and wanted to record a wide range of songs, from gospel to blues to pop. When he returned to the studio in June 1970, this time in Nashville, he worked with another group of skilled musicians and recorded 35 songs. The material was well received, but it didn't match the commercial success of the American sessions. The single, You Don't Have to Say You Love Me, reached No. 11, but other singles from the session didn't perform as well. This shift in his musical direction appealed more to country fans, who saw Elvis as a country artist, even though he never limited himself to one genre. By the summer of 1969, Elvis was preparing for his Las Vegas engagement, which Colonel Tom Parker had booked. Elvis was excited about returning to live performances and approached the shows with confidence and determination. He wanted to present a diverse repertoire that included all the different styles of music that had shaped his career. This was a bold move at a time when many musicians were narrowing their focus to appeal to specific audiences. Elvis hired a top-notch band led by James Burton, a respected guitarist, and 2 vocal groups, the Imperials and the Sweet Inspirations. They rehearsed intensively for nearly 2 weeks, perfecting the sound and repertoire Elvis envisioned. Colonel Parker went all out with the marketing and promotion, ensuring that the opening night was a star-studded event. When Elvis took the stage on July 31, 1969, he overcame his pre-show nerves and delivered a performance that left the audience in awe. He opened with a rocking version of Blue Suede Shoes, and the energy never let up. Elvis moved with agility, grooving with the band and even performing somersaults and flips. The highlight was Suspicious Minds, which soon became his new signature song. Between songs, he shared personal stories and jokes, connecting with the audience on a deep level. He expressed his gratitude for being back on stage, saying, "I really missed the people. I really missed contact with a live audience, and I just wanted to tell you how good it is to be back." This Las Vegas show marked the beginning of a new chapter in Elvis's career, where he continued to blend different styles of music and captivate audiences with his dynamic performances. Elvis Presley's comeback in Las Vegas in 1969 was nothing short of a miracle. The energy and excitement from that first night didn't fade. Instead, it grew stronger with each passing day. As the days turned into weeks, Elvis became more relaxed and even more high-spirited. His performances were electrifying, and the crowd couldn't get enough of him. During the final week of the engagement, RCA started recording the shows. They wanted to create a live album that would capture the magic of Elvis's performances and share it with fans who couldn't make it to Vegas. The reviews were amazing, and both the alternative press and mainstream newspapers praised Elvis's return to the stage. Elvis and his manager, Colonel Parker, were overjoyed. After the opening night show, Parker, who rarely showed emotion, cried tears of joy and hugged Elvis. It was a rare moment of vulnerability for both of them. Capitalizing on the success, Parker quickly negotiated a new contract with the International Hotel. Elvis agreed to perform 2 4-week engagements every year for the next 5 years, and he would be paid a whopping $500,000 for each gig. The contract also included a clause that ensured Elvis would always be the highest paid headliner. If anyone else, like Barbra Streisand or Frank Sinatra, got a better deal, Elvis's pay would match or exceed it. As the 1970s began, Elvis's shows in Vegas became legendary. He set attendance records and developed a unique repertoire that included both his classic hits and contemporary pop rock and country covers. Songs like Bridge Over Troubled Water and An American Trilogy became fan favorites. An American Trilogy was especially powerful, blending Dixie, Battle Hymn of the Republic, and an African-American spiritual. It was a song that reflected Elvis's complex musical and national heritage, and it often left the audience in awe. Elvis's concerts were more than just music. They were a visual spectacle. He worked closely with Bill Ballou, a Hollywood costume designer, to create elaborate outfits that were both dazzling and a bit over the top. Elvis's costumes, adorned with rhinestones and jewels, made him look like a superhero or a mystical figure. His stage presence was magnetic, and he would often interact with the audience, throwing kisses, handkerchiefs, and scarves to the women in the front rows. This interaction became a cherished part of the show. Elvis's performances were also marked by his interest in karate, which influenced his stage choreography. Songs like Polk Salad Annie and Suspicious Minds included karate-inspired moves, and the shows always ended with Can't Help Falling in Love, followed by a quick exit from the stage. Despite his success, some critics and younger fans were disappointed. They felt that Elvis had sold out to the glitz and glamour of Vegas. However, Elvis's Vegas act resonated with a large segment of his audience, especially working-class and evangelical fans who appreciated his religiosity, patriotism, and the emotional depth of his performances. These fans were deeply grateful for Elvis's connection to his roots and the traditions that had shaped him. Elvis's success in Vegas encouraged Parker to arrange more tours. In early 1970, Elvis performed at Houston's Astrodome, drawing record-breaking crowds. The shows were well received, and the positive response led to a more extensive tour in September. Elvis and his band played in major cities across the country, and the concerts were a hit. The revenue from these tours was substantial, and it became clear that touring was a lucrative venture for Elvis. In 1972, Elvis played 3 concerts at New York's Madison Square Garden, marking the peak of his career as a live performer. He hadn't played in New York since the 1950s, and the shows were a huge success. The New York Times praised Elvis, comparing him to legendary figures like Joe Louis and Joe DiMaggio. The concerts were so popular that RCA quickly released a live album, which became a top seller. Parker also arranged for several documentaries to be made about Elvis. The first, Elvis, That's the Way It Is, followed Elvis as he prepared for his 1970 Vegas engagement. The second, Elvis on Tour, captured his 1972 tour and included candid interviews where Elvis spoke about his disappointment with his movie career. Both documentaries were successful and gave fans a behind-the-scenes look at Elvis's life and performances. Perhaps Parker's greatest achievement was the Aloha from Hawaii special. He had been dreaming of a live, closed-circuit broadcast for years, and by the early 1970s, the technology was finally available. NBC agreed to pay Elvis $900,000 to perform a concert in Hawaii, which would be broadcast via satellite to a worldwide audience of 1.5 billion people. Elvis was thrilled and prepared meticulously. He lost weight, worked on his set list, and had Ballou design a new jewel-encrusted costume. The show was a huge success, with high ratings in Japan and Europe. When it was finally broadcast in the United States, it drew a massive audience, confirming Elvis's status as a global superstar. Elvis's performances in the 1970s were a testament to his enduring talent and his ability to connect with his audience. Despite the criticism, he remained the king of rock and roll, and his shows continued to inspire and captivate fans around the world. Elvis Presley's comeback in the late 1960s was a huge success. The 1968 NBC special, Elvis, not only brought him back into the spotlight, but also restored his reputation as a musical performer. By the early 1970s, his audience was more diverse than ever, including people of all ages and from different parts of the world. For many, Elvis was the embodiment of rock and roll, a charismatic and rebellious figure whose music was full of energy and joy. Even though some fans were disappointed by the ballads and inspirational songs in his live shows, they still came to see him, knowing they were witnessing a piece of music history. However, Elvis's return to stardom came with challenges. One significant issue was the changing dynamics of his fan base, especially among African Americans. In the 1950s and early 1960s, Black Americans were among his most devoted fans. They appreciated his love for gospel, soul, and R&B, and his willingness to acknowledge the influence of African American musicians. But as the civil rights movement gained momentum and racial tensions escalated, many African Americans began to distance themselves from white artists, including Elvis. Some critics accused white performers of appropriating black culture, and Elvis became a target of these accusations. This led to a gradual decline in his African American fan base, which contributed to the myth that he had never appealed to black audiences. In January 1971, Elvis's status as a mainstream icon was solidified when he was named one of the nation's 10 Outstanding Young Men of the Year by the Junior Chamber of Commerce. The award was a significant honor, and Elvis was thrilled to receive it in his hometown of Memphis. He worked hard on his acceptance speech, which revealed a mature and reflective side of him. At the ceremony, he spoke about his dreams coming true and his belief in the power of entertainment to bring people happiness. His speech was a poignant reminder of his humble beginnings and the journey he had undertaken to become one of the most influential artists of the 20th century. Despite the accolades, Elvis's personal life was troubled. His marriage to Priscilla had been strained since the birth of their daughter, Lisa Marie. Elvis had a difficult time reconnecting with Priscilla after the 1968 special, and his return to performing only exacerbated the issues. They spent less time together, and Elvis's renewed interest in women and his wild lifestyle in Las Vegas further strained their relationship. Priscilla became suspicious of his fidelity and began to feel neglected. She even had an affair with her dance instructor, and later a more serious relationship with Mike Stone, a karate champion. Elvis's infidelity and lack of attention took a toll on Priscilla. By the end of 1971, their marriage had become a topic of gossip, and Priscilla began to spend more time in Los Angeles with Lisa Marie. In December 1971, she told Elvis she wanted a divorce, which shocked him. 2 months later, she revealed her relationship with Mike Stone, which pushed Elvis over the edge. He became paranoid and even considered having Stone killed, though he eventually backed down. The divorce was finalized in October 1973, and Elvis's mood became increasingly melancholic. His personal struggles affected his music and performances. During recording sessions in March 1972, Elvis was drawn to mournful ballads that reflected his emotional state. He recorded Burning Love at the urging of his producer, but it didn't change his musical preferences. His concerts also reflected his somber mood, with Elvis often alluding to his marriage and insisting that he and Priscilla remained close friends. Elvis's comeback had restored his fame, but it also brought new challenges that he struggled to overcome. His personal life was in turmoil, and his relationship with Priscilla had irreparably broken down. Despite these difficulties, Elvis continued to perform and record, leaving a lasting legacy as the king of rock and roll. Elvis Presley's life was a whirlwind of ups and downs, but one of the most significant factors affecting his well-being was his ongoing struggle with prescription drug abuse. After his divorce from Priscilla, many of his friends and family members blamed his downbeat state on the split. However, this was too easy of an explanation, and it allowed them to overlook a more serious issue: Elvis's continued abuse of prescription drugs. Elvis had never stopped taking amphetamines and sleeping pills, even during the intense preparation for his TV special and his first Vegas engagement. These drugs were his constant companions, helping him stay awake for performances and then helping him sleep afterward. Whenever a new challenge came his way, like a show at Madison Square Garden or the Hawaii special, Elvis would focus and limit his drug use. His friends and family were impressed by these moments of self-control and assumed he would eventually clean up for good. Joe Esposito, one of Elvis's closest friends, explained, "We'd all seen him suddenly stop drugs, so there was always hope that one day he would clean up for good." However, as Elvis's career became more routine, his drug use increased. The excitement of new projects didn't come as often, and without these challenges, he became bored and more susceptible to distractions. Jerry Schilling, another close friend, noted, "That's when he began to have a lot of time to just start getting into other things." In Las Vegas and Los Angeles, Elvis had even easier access to drugs. Doctors in these cities were used to catering to the whims of celebrities and would prescribe whatever Elvis wanted. This made it difficult for his regular doctor, Dr. George Nishapoulos, to keep track of his drug intake or manage the harmful side effects. By 1973, Elvis had become addicted to Demerol, a powerful synthetic opiate, and was regularly taking large quantities of sleeping pills and downers like Percodan and Dilaudid. He even started using cocaine, which he believed helped counteract the effects of the other drugs and gave him an extra boost. Elvis rationalized his drug use, telling a girlfriend, "I need it." But as his drug use increased, he became more defensive and angry when his father, Vernon, or members of his entourage brought up the subject. The drugs not only increased the risk of addiction and overdose, but also worsened his mental health. Some biographers suggest that Elvis may have inherited a predisposition to depression from his mother, Gladys. If this is true, Elvis might have struggled with depression regardless of his career or lifestyle. However, his celebrity and access to drugs made it easier for him to cope in unhealthy ways. The drugs also caused severe physical health problems. His intake of downers led to intestinal issues, liver damage, and bloating. These health problems forced him to cancel performances and seek medical treatment. In October 1973, Elvis was rushed to a Memphis hospital in a semi-comatose state. Doctors discovered his addiction to Demerol and began treating him with methadone, a common treatment for heroin addiction. For a while, Elvis remained relatively sober, but by the fall of 1974, he reverted to his old habits, using his connections to bypass Dr. Nishapoulos' monitoring. Despite these struggles, Elvis found some temporary relief in his relationship with Linda Thompson, a Memphis beauty queen. Linda, who was only 22 when they met, provided the attention and care he craved. She helped him recover from his near overdose and gave him a sense of security. However, as Elvis's drug use increased, Linda became more worried and eventually left him in November 1976, marking a significant turning point. By then, Elvis had found a new girlfriend, Ginger Alden, a 19-year-old who was less accommodating than Linda. Ginger played hard to get and used her relationship with Elvis to bring her family into his inner circle, which made many of Elvis's friends uncomfortable. Despite their concerns, Elvis proposed to Ginger in January 1977, and they became engaged. However, Ginger's independence and reluctance to be a constant companion sent Elvis into emotional turmoil. During the 1970s, Elvis also became increasingly paranoid about his safety. He was shaken by the assassinations and kidnappings of the late 1960s and early 1970s, and began to fear he might be a target. This led him to transform his entourage into a security detail, arming them and carrying guns himself. He also befriended John O'Grady, a former narcotics agent, who encouraged his interest in law enforcement. Elvis's fear and desire to feel protected led him to seek an official badge from the Federal Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. In a surreal meeting with President Nixon, Elvis proposed using his influence to help counteract the anti-American sentiment of the counterculture and the New Left. Nixon, moved by Elvis's sincerity, granted his request, and Elvis left the White House with a badge and a renewed sense of purpose. Elvis's interest in law enforcement and his conservative views were partly a reaction to the social and political changes of the late 1960s. He saw himself as someone who could bridge the gap between the establishment and the counterculture, using his influence to steer young people away from bad influences. However, his efforts to maintain control over his entourage and his capricious favoritism continued to create tension and jealousy among his closest friends. As Elvis's life became increasingly chaotic, his drug use, health issues, and personal relationships all contributed to a growing sense of unease. Despite his fame and success, he was a man struggling with deep-seated fears and a growing sense of isolation. Elvis's world was changing, and not for the better. He started to think that his friends, even the ones who had been with him since the beginning, were only there for the money and the perks. His mind was clouded by drugs, and this suspicion grew into a strong belief. He became mean, often reminding his friends who was in charge. His behavior became unpredictable, and he started to treat people in his entourage more and more harshly. Lamar Fike, one of the old guard, noticed the change. In the early 70s, and up to the end, Elvis got really mean, he said. Elvis would boast and belittle people, always trying to show who was the boss. The drugs didn't help. They made him act in ways that were hard to understand. Some of his longtime friends, like Fike and Jerry Schilling, got fed up and left to find their own paths. They were replaced by younger men who were more like employees than friends. This only made Elvis worry more about loyalty. Security became a big deal for Elvis. He used his connections to get weapons for himself and his security team. He would often show off his guns to impress people or scare his friends. Unfortunately, he wasn't always careful with the weapons. There were a few close calls where guns went off and people almost got hurt, but Elvis didn't seem to care. He continued to fire guns at TV and chandeliers, and once he even shot up a hotel toilet, which made people laugh. Elvis's security team, led by Red West, also got into trouble. They would beat up people trying to get into Elvis's suite, which led to lawsuits and bad publicity. Elvis and his father, Vernon, used these incidents as an excuse to fire Red and Sonny West, but Elvis had encouraged this behavior. He had taught them karate and made them believe they were protecting him from danger. It was a vicious cycle. Maintaining an entourage was expensive, and Vernon knew this all too well. But Elvis didn't care. He was earning over $5 million a year, and felt he could buy anything he wanted. He bought a lot of cars, motorcycles, and rare weapons. He filled his home, Graceland, with new decorations, and even turned a room into a Polynesian-themed den called the Jungle Room. He bought planes, including a decommissioned airliner he named the Lisa Marie. These purchases were a source of pride for Elvis, and he would use his planes to fly to different cities on a whim, often to impress a new girlfriend. Elvis's spending wasn't just about himself. He was generous to a fault, especially with his family, friends, and even strangers. He bought custom-made jewelry, guns, and cars as gifts. He once even tried to give a rare gun to President Nixon. During a shopping spree in Memphis, he spent $140,000 on 14 Cadillacs and gave them away as gifts. One car went to a woman who was just window shopping. A Denver newscaster made a joke on air about wanting a car from Elvis, and Elvis bought him a Cadillac Seville. Vernon was worried about Elvis's spending. He feared bankruptcy and tried to warn Elvis to be more careful. But Elvis didn't listen. When Vernon and Priscilla tried to confront him, Elvis got angry and left town, leading to his famous meeting with President Nixon. As Elvis's drug use increased, it became harder for Vernon to talk to him. Colonel Parker, who was deep in gambling debt, wasn't much help either. Without Priscilla, who had separated from Elvis, Vernon had no one to support him in trying to control Elvis's spending. Elvis's spending was influenced by his past. He had grown up poor and didn't want to save his money like a typical rich person. He wanted to enjoy his wealth and share it with others. But his spending became a problem when it was driven by drugs and a need to control his entourage. By the mid-1970s, Elvis was spending more than he was earning, and this was a big worry for Vernon. Elvis's reckless spending also limited his career options. He was stuck in a cycle of concert tours, which were more lucrative than Las Vegas shows. These tours were exhausting and left him too tired to record or think about new projects. In 1973, RCA tried to get Elvis to record at Stax Studios in Memphis, The sessions were a disaster. Elvis was late, stoned, and uninspired. He only completed a few songs, and the single "Raised on Rock" was a commercial flop. Elvis returned to Stax in December 1973, this time sober and more productive. He recorded 18 songs in a week, but none of them were as successful as "Burning Love." His new music wasn't selling as well, and his audience had shrunk to a hardcore of about 200,000 fans. RCA had been trying to get Colonel Parker to allow them to release greatest hits packages for years. In 1973, Parker finally agreed, and RCA bought the rights to Elvis's pre-1973 recordings for $5,400,000. This gave RCA the freedom to repackage old material, which outsold Elvis's new music. This further reinforced the idea that Elvis was an oldies act. Despite these challenges, RCA still believed in Elvis. They offered him a new 7-year contract, requiring him to produce 2 albums and 4 singles per year. But as Elvis found it harder to record, Parker had to release unorthodox material to meet the contract's demands. RCA also released a series of greatest hits packages, which sold well but hurt the sales of Elvis's new music. The reissues made it seem like Elvis was no longer a relevant artist, just a collection of old hits. Elvis Presley's life in the 1970s was a roller coaster of ups and downs, heavily influenced by his drug abuse and the resulting health issues. Despite these challenges, he still tried to record music, but it was tough. In March 1975, Elvis and his band gathered in Los Angeles to record new songs. They managed to complete only 10 tracks, and even the best one, Trouble, didn't do well, selling just 200,000 copies. Hoping to inspire Elvis, his manager, Felton Jarvis, brought a mobile recording studio to Graceland, Elvis's home. In February 1976, they set up in the Jungle Room, a place Elvis had recently redecorated. The session was disappointing. Elvis was often distracted or under the influence of drugs. When he was sober, he spent time showing off his police badges or talking about New Age mysticism. He even spent hours in his bedroom, listening to gospel music and watching TV. Sometimes he would talk about his wild ideas, like going after drug dealers in Memphis. Jarvis tried again in October 1976, but the session was even worse. Elvis was distracted, and he spent most of the time in his bedroom. One night, he came out with a submachine gun, and another night, he stopped recording to ride new motorcycles around the neighborhood. After 2 days, Elvis apologized to the musicians and canceled the session. With studio recordings drying up, Jarvis started recording Elvis's live concerts, hoping to use the live material to make up for the lack of new studio songs. As Elvis's record sales dropped and his new music became less popular, he relied more on touring for income and to feel good about himself. In 1974, he went on several tours, playing shows in March, May, June, and October. These tours brought in about $4 million, while his gigs in Las Vegas and Lake Tahoe earned much less, around $700,000. The concerts were not just about money. They were a way for Elvis to feel the love and support of his fans. When he saw negative reviews, his fans defended him fiercely, which made him feel even more connected to them. For many fans, attending Elvis's concerts was more than just entertainment. It was a special experience, almost like a religious ritual. This bond between Elvis and his fans laid the groundwork for the devotion that continued even after his death. However, this devotion had a downside. No matter how poorly Elvis performed, his fans cheered loudly. This made him feel like he could get away with not trying as hard, and he started to rely on performing his old hits instead of trying new things. When he did try new songs, and the fans didn't react as enthusiastically, he quickly went back to his old material. This strategy worked in the past, but in the 1970s, the music industry was changing. The audience was fragmenting into smaller groups with different tastes, and Elvis could have explored new directions. But he was so focused on being the biggest star that he was afraid to take risks. Elvis's relationship with his manager, Colonel Parker, was also strained. They had their biggest argument in September 1973, when Elvis criticized the Las Vegas Hilton management during a show. Parker was furious and stormed into Elvis's suite, leading to a heated argument. Elvis fired Parker, but when he saw how much it would cost to break their contract, he apologized and they made up. Another issue was the possibility of a European tour. Parker always said no, citing logistical problems, but it's possible that Elvis was the one who didn't want to travel abroad, fearing new security measures that could affect his drug supply. One of Parker's biggest mistakes was turning down Barbra Streisand's offer for Elvis to co-star in her movie, A Star is Born. Elvis was excited about the opportunity, but Parker thought the deal was too small and didn't give Elvis enough control. The movie went to Chris Christopherson instead, and Elvis sank deeper into depression without a new challenge. By 1975, Elvis's performances were becoming more problematic. He forgot lyrics, his voice was often weak, and his stage banter was bizarre. Sometimes he could barely speak because of the drugs. Concerts were canceled, and his frequent hospitalizations were a major concern. In January 1975, Elvis was hospitalized after an overdose, and his doctor, Dr. Nishapoulos, tried to control his drug intake. Elvis even had a racquetball court built at Graceland to help with his health, but the damage from years of drug abuse was already taking its toll. Despite these efforts, Elvis's health and performances continued to decline, and his fans and the media began to notice. Elvis Presley, the king of rock and roll, had been struggling for a long time. Despite the efforts of those around him, including his longtime doctor, Dr. Nishapoulos, and his inner circle, Elvis couldn't stop taking drugs. He became adept at getting the kinds of drugs he wanted, even when his doctor tried to keep them away. His health problems, including issues with his liver and lungs, led to multiple hospital stays, and his performances became increasingly inconsistent. By 1976, it was clear that Elvis was in serious trouble. His weight gain, forgetfulness, and erratic behavior on stage were becoming more noticeable, and the press began to criticize him heavily. Elvis's relationships with those closest to him also suffered. His ex-wife, Priscilla, and his girlfriend, Linda Thompson, tried to help him but eventually gave up. His father, Vernon, was also powerless to control his son. Members of his entourage, who were often dealing with their own drug issues and feared losing their jobs, were in no position to be assertive. Even Colonel Parker, his longtime manager, couldn't exert much influence over Elvis. Parker's attempts to work behind the scenes to stop the flow of drugs to Elvis were largely ineffective. As Elvis's condition worsened, he became more reclusive, spending much of his time in his bedroom at Graceland. He installed surveillance cameras to monitor the activities of his entourage, whom he increasingly distrusted. In 1976, Elvis fired some of his closest friends and bodyguards, including Red West and Sonny West, after they confronted him about his drug use. This only added to his isolation and fear of betrayal. The negative press and tabloids only made things worse. Stories about Elvis's weight gain, drug abuse, and erratic behavior were splashed across the pages of magazines like the National Enquirer. Elvis's performances continued to be hit or miss, and the criticism from the media and fans took a toll on his mental health. He became more depressed and retreated further into his world of drugs and isolation. In the summer of 1977, as Elvis prepared for a new tour, he was deeply concerned about the upcoming publication of a book by his former bodyguards which would expose his drug problem. He considered admitting his issues to his fans if they started to react negatively during his shows, but he never had the chance. On August 16, 1977, Elvis was found dead in his bathroom at Graceland. He was only 42 years old. The official cause of death was heart failure, but it was later revealed that the real cause was a fatal combination of drugs in his system. Elvis's death was a tragic end to a life that had once been full of promise and talent. He had struggled with the pressures of fame and the loss of control over his own life. Despite his immense success, Elvis never found the peace and balance he needed. His story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of drug abuse and the isolating effects of fame, but it also highlights the enduring love and admiration of his fans, who continued to support him even as he struggled. Elvis may have been his own worst enemy, but he will always be remembered as the king of rock and roll, a legend whose music and legacy continue to inspire and captivate people around the world.